Okay, so hi everyone. This is Lisa from Been There, Got Out, and today we are with Master Mediator Sheldon Stark, with his really funky background. So let's just dive in, Shel. You want to just introduce yourself quickly and give a little bit of background, because I know today's topic is going to be how can I get a difficult person to settle?
Hmm. I've been mediating for several decades. Um, about half my work is employment related, thus the background, which is the 1921 chassis line at the Packard plant in Detroit, Michigan. And the other half of my practice is commercial disputes, often referred to as divorce business or business
Mhm.
divorce. So I mediate 50, 60 cases per year. I don't actually do domestic relations mediation unless it's part and parcel of a property dispute or a business dispute between a husband and wife.
Right. But even though you don't do it, something in your content that my partner Chris found really struck a chord with us. And when we had our conversation a few weeks ago, I thought this is perfect for mediation involving high conflict cases. So I figured even though you don't handle that specific area, the techniques you use would work very well in what our clients and our community deal with all the time. So one of the things that you mentioned was that people fall in love with their righteous indignation. What does that mean, and how does that affect mediation from the very beginning of the process?
I think the technical term is confirmation bias.
Yes.
We believe what we want to believe, but people do fall in love with their allegations, their claims, and their defenses. And the more the struggle escalates, in fact, the more convinced they are of their righteous positions. And what happens when people are so dug in and so convinced of the truth of their perspective, the more they tend to brush any challenges, any weaknesses, any self responsibility under the rug, and thereby fail to recognize the risks that their divorce litigation presents, both in terms of what might happen at a trial and what might happen to the family, the more escalation that there is.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a little while about the risks of taking something to litigation. But I know at the beginning of when you do a session with people, you ask them what their goals and objectives are. So what are some of the most common answers that people say?
So I asked this question in the confidential setting where nobody else can overhear them from the other side, because this is very valuable, sensitive information. So frequently people will say, I want justice. That warns me that somebody may not really understand what mediation is all about. Mediation being a dispute resolution process, not a justice process. You want justice, you go to trial, you get a judge or jury to determine the outcome.
Well,
But
even then, Shel, with a lot of times we run into people who are looking for justice or validation or vindication from the court system, and we tell them that's not the place to get it either. You have to get that outside of the dispute, somewhere else.
At least with family court stuff.
Yeah.
well, in family court or any other court, uh, the French philosopher Voltaire, I love to quote this. He famously said in the 18th century, I've only been ruined in my life but twice, once when I lost a lawsuit and once when I won one.
Mm.
Oh, ha. You winners can be losers. You burn the family home down in the lawsuit with the attorney fees, can take all the equity out of the house. Is anybody a winner at that point? I don't think so.
Right, right.
So
Yeah. Okay. So you're
justice. A
Mhm.
second thing is I want a fair result. And that's either a good signal or bad, because everybody forgets that fairness and the definition of fairness may turn on where they stand in the conflict. Um, People often say they want an apology or at least an acknowledgement that what was done to them was wrong. And then many people say closure. They would like an end to this chapter in their life so that they can move forward and open a new chapter in where they're heading.
Right. And that's certainly what our clients and us also need. We need closure. Often we can't get it from our ex, but this is at least a process to start finally moving on with our lives and starting that next chapter.
So in those preliminary meetings I have where I ask the parties what their goals and objectives are, it often turns out their lawyer hasn't asked them that question. So they're very excited to give you an answer. And if they don't say closure, I ask them how important closure is, because I spent 30 years almost as a trial lawyer. And what I discovered was that for a lot of people, getting their case settled actually gave them peace. Whereas during the litigation, every time there was an important hearing, I wanted them to be in the courtroom so the judge would see there was a human being behind the matter. If there was an important deposition to be taken of a key witness, I wanted my client to be there to see it for themselves and maybe be a truth serum for the witness. And people would say to me every time they got a letter from me or every time I asked them to attend one of these things, flashbacks, sleepless nights, couldn't eat, headaches, etc. And all those symptoms go away generally when the matter is resolved.
Yeah, and that's something that we talked about as well, is what is the value to closure? And it's a tremendous value. It's not just like you mentioned some of the health things, but what other values can you think of? Because I made a little list.
Oh, I'd like to hear your list.
Well, okay, so you said the things about not sleeping and the health stuff, but we talked about the different costs that are associated with not having closure. And we talked about that there's economic, which are the legal costs and the court costs. And then the ones you mentioned, I think you called collateral consequences, such as someone's reputation, their health, which you noted, their parenting is affected. Certainly, our people certainly know how much stress we're under and often feel guilty because how can I parent well when my brain is consumed with this conflict? We also talked about stress, which is right in there, and missed work. So when you're busy with court, I know for me, I had to take away from the time I could have been earning a living. So that kind of bleeds into the economic costs.
In my business and employment practice, collateral consequences can include dragging your customers into the lawsuit. And because there are other vendors like you out there, you drag Ford Motor Company, for example, into your lawsuit because you're having a fight with an employee over whether they were performing well. Ford's not going to like it. So you can lose vendors, you can lose banking relationships, you can lose employees who leave because they don't want to deal with the stress. I can imagine in families, there's the risk of making the kids even more stressed out than before. Good friends may feel divided loyalties and begin to back away from a relationship because they're concerned. They don't want to be seen as taking sides, or equally significant, they don't want to be involved. Don't let me testify. Yeah, but you told me. Yeah, but I told you that in confidence. And now you're dragging me in. I can't be friends with you anymore. So collateral consequences come in all. Sometimes a case will wind up in the newspapers, and thereby all sorts of really sensitive information, private information, confidential information gets put right in front of the public. And you don't have to be a prominent person for that to happen. Slow news day, somebody is over at the courthouse looking at stuff, hears about a matter, this is the 8th hearing over parenting time. Oh, maybe I'll stick my head in there. And suddenly there's a story in the paper, and everybody in your neighborhood from whom you've been careful not to reveal, they know.
Yeah.
Again,
one you made me think of, Shel, is sometimes one party will want to get a child's therapist involved to prove a point of some kind.
right.
And what happens is, even if, and therapists hate to do that, but even if they do get involved, it breaks their attorney-client, I mean, not attorney, their privileged relationship with the child, and they can't treat them anymore. So you can lose a really good therapist that way.
And it seems to me you may very well turn the kids against one another, because I've seen cases. I do some probate and estate work. Siblings take sides. They escalate against one another, and loving relationships can suddenly be torn asunder or destroyed.
Yeah, yeah. So there's tremendous value to getting it done privately in mediation, if at all possible. And the thing you mentioned with reputation is often something that our exes, our clients' exes are concerned about. And so that's a form of leverage to say, look, it's really better for us to settle this in these rooms rather in that courtroom.
Exactly.
Okay,
right.
so another thing you said is you ask an icebreaker question. I'm not sure if you remember what it was, but I wrote it down in case you forgot, when you first sign on with a new group of parties for mediation.
How you doing?
That wasn't it.
Is that the question?
No, the question was, have you done anything to research the topic with mediation other than with your lawyer? So
That's
why do you ask that question? Yeah, next to after Harvey.
That's my second icebreaker.
Okay.
And the first icebreaker, how you doing? So many people you just see them relax, because nobody's asked them that before. Lawyers just assume you're going to do everything I tell you to do, right?
Good point.
And number two, they come to mediation, even though it's a voluntary process, even though nobody's going to impose a settlement, even though mediators have no authority. They come to it thinking we are like a judge, that we are somebody who they really need to worry about. And I'm going to decide their case. So asking them how they're doing, that's really helps people relax and get comfortable with the process. The second question, what have you done to prepare yourself for mediation? I asked that for several reasons. First of all, I put a lot of material on my website that I encourage lawyers to use to educate their clients about the process. Mediation is a unique opportunity in the entire lawsuit for the parties to take a step back, go up on the balcony, look down, get a broad perspective, and take stock of whether resolution makes more sense than continuing the expense and the trauma and the roller coaster ride of the litigation. So I put that stuff out there. And when people tell me they've not done anything to prepare themselves, I then take that opportunity to begin an education process, because I want the parties to get the most out of the mediation process. And to do that, you have to understand its strengths, its weaknesses, its challenges, and what this opportunity presents. In a lawsuit, somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and then it's over. In the typical lawsuits that I mediate, the only remedy is dollars, damages. In mediation, you can resolve all manner of difficulties that a court will never hear. You work out what we call a business solution so that the parties can continue to work together. And in the case of young children, isn't that something that would be valuable for the parties, even though they're getting divorced and even though the divorce is bitter, they can continue to work together for the sake and benefit of the kids. You can open new channels of communication so that people who haven't been able to understand one another have a new way to talk about things so as to avoid the expense of being in court every week on some dispute over the exchange of the kids, or whether the girlfriend or the boyfriend was at the house overnight when they shouldn't have been, etc. So mediation is really a golden opportunity to take your nose off the grindstone of the struggle and take a long view. What's in my best interest? What's in the best interest of the kids? What are really my underlying needs and interests that are driving the conflict, as opposed to here's my position and here's what I demand.
Yeah, and those are things that really need to be considered prior to being in the room with you, is to really think clearly. That's something we do with our clients as well, preparing for mediation. Sometimes you say, what are your goals? And it's like, I don't know. Well, let's figure it out before you start spending money and going in there and get bumped around and pressured to settle something. Another thing you do that I thought was really interesting is you said you have your clients do a pledge at the beginning of mediation. Yes. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So throughout the litigation process, throughout the lawsuit, everybody is in what I call a zealous advocate mode. Rah, score every point, win every argument, pin the other side down, and just get what I want. Well, mediation's a voluntary process. There's no resolution unless everybody agrees. In order to achieve that, I believe you set a good foundation for an exchange of information and a negotiation by saying to everybody, for purposes of mediation only, let's set aside zealous advocacy and let's recognize we all have the same problem. Is there an off-ramp to this dispute, and can we find it? Therefore, if we all take the perspective of joint problem solvers, maybe we create a better environment in which to resolve the case. And I ask people to take the pledge, and here's what I tell them it entails. First of all, we don't try to score every point. Oops, I guess I've little icons on the screen. I didn't mean to do that. Okay. So we don't try to score every point. We try to see the other guy's perspective. We recognize that we'll make the best judgments about whether to settle and on what terms if we have all the information available. That means I come to mediation to listen as much as I come to mediation to tell my story, because I want to have all the information that's available. And if I'm not listening, I'm not going to get the benefit of that mediation. I'm willing to make reasonable, a joint problem solver is willing to make reasonable concessions. Yeah, you're right about that problem. Yeah, I did come home drunk that night. Yeah, you're right about that. So you make reasonable concessions. And finally, we agree we'll use the language of diplomacy. There's a reason they talk the way they do at the UN. And mediators are very good at reframing what people say. So you call the other side a lying scumbag. What are they going to do? They're not going to say, yeah, you're right about that. That's not a reasonable concession. They're going to retaliate. So if that's where you're going, maybe a better way to put it for me as a mediator is to say, you have real questions about their good faith, and you have real questions about the credibility of what they're saying.
So you're a translator. You translate.
Indeed. And then I say, will you take the pledge? I have yet to mediate a case where people trying to get on my good side have said, no, I refuse. Everybody agrees. And then when they start to escalate, when they do start moving up the conflict scale, I can remind them, I understand your passion. I respect the feelings that you bring to this. But let's remember, this is not a justice process. This is a dispute resolution process. And if we're going to find that resolution, we need to bring the temperature down. And put that way, people say, you're right. I do get wound up. Thanks for the reminder. And we can move forward.
Yeah, I love how you establish these ground rules at the beginning. So there's a buy-in, and then remind them of that. It reminds me when I used to teach high school, and we used to come up with rules of the classroom at the beginning of the year. And then when people would, of course, adolescents certainly don't follow, you say, oh, now you're in trouble, but you realize why, and they get it and they accept it. So everyone's on the same page. Okay, so something you mentioned, it sounds very cooperative, but the people that are going to be listening to this are dealing with really difficult people. And one of the things difficult people do is they don't bring in the information necessary to settle. And I'm talking financial. And so often we have to figure out a way to settle without the full picture. So how do you handle it when people are, let's say, hiding assets and somebody doesn't have access to the books? How can they, like a client, let's say one of our clients, how can they reach a point of acceptance where they know they're never going to be able to get this information?
So that's a super hard challenge. And it comes up in my practice too, because somebody will say, I don't have the money to pay a settlement, or I don't have the wherewithal, I don't have the ability to go to the bank or whatever to pull together assets to make a settlement proposal. And in those cases, my first effort is to go to the counsel for that party and say, look, the other side's not going to believe that. They don't believe anything that your side is saying. That's why you're in this lawsuit. So if there's going to be any chance of getting it resolved at a lower level because of your client's allegations of verge of bankruptcy or limited resources, et cetera, it's time to put up. You got to show it. And I'm normally able with that approach to persuade counsel to go to the client to make every effort to get them to produce the material in advance of the mediation. And if the client says no, well, then you can be fairly certain they are indeed hiding the assets.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, you kind of have to make two choices. One is, am I willing to settle for less? And what are the chances that I'm ever going to be able to find those assets and attach them? And if the chances are limited, then you have to make a different choice. What is the value of closure? Are you willing to give up some significant portion of those hidden assets to get closure? And that comes up by own practice all the time. For instance, this doesn't have to do with somebody being broke, but in an employment case, the employer says, I'm willing to pay $125,000, but I'm not going to pay $150,000. And the plaintiff says, I'm not going to take anything less than $150,000. Well, we got an impasse. I can try to get them to split the difference. I can make a mediator's proposal as to a number that both sides will have a hard time rejecting. Or if those don't work, you then go to the plaintiff and say, you told me at the beginning that closure had value. Well, today we know the value of closure is $25,000. Does closure have a value of $25,000 to you? If it doesn't, then you reject the 125 and you proceed. But if closure would be worth $25,000 to you, then we have a settlement. So,
yeah, and
closure can sometimes have a dollar value.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked about managing clients' expectations. There was a quote you said that I just love about expectations are resentments under construction.
Oh, very good. Yes, yes, that's my favorite.
Yeah. So how do you handle, let's say, managing expectations in terms of the best deal available today? Talk a little bit about that.
Um, so this is a very important technique or approach in mediation. And it actually begins very early on. When we're talking about what are your goals and objectives, sometimes people talk about numbers. And if it's $100,000 case and somebody is talking about millions, you know, you've got a long education process to go through. And again, I provide lawyers lots of information and material on my website to assist with that, including a paper I've written called Negotiations 101, what every party should know about the negotiation process. Most people come to mediation with experience negotiating. What are we having for dinner? What movie are we going to go to Saturday night? Can I get another $1 an hour out of the boss for my compensation? Would you take $500 less for that car? What if I offered you $390 instead of $400 on the new house? We all have that kind of experience. But when they come to mediation, and that's been their experience negotiating, and they say, I've got this $1 million case and the other side offers 5,000, it causes enormous consternation, outrage, disappointment, frustration, and it may turn a mediation sideways. So I encourage lawyers to give the paper to parties to give them some sense of what to expect in mediation. And even if the opening offer is only $5,000, they should understand they shouldn't get worried until we get to round 4 or 5. And if it's still in that range at 4 or 5, chances are we're not going to be able to settle this case at the level you want. But so that's managing expectations. But then in addition, you can have a very good conversation about what are the numbers being offered? How much is it going to cost to continue the litigation in attorney's fees, in transcript costs, in expert witnesses? An employment case can cost $125,000 to defend. You know, that's a lot of money. I think a hotly contested divorce case can cost $200,000 and $300,000
More
and more and more. So if I really want $1 million, there's 700 on the table, and it's going to cost me 300 to get to $1 million. What's the best business judgment I can make? Can I make a good business judgment unclouded by all the emotions that I've brought to the table? So that's another aspect of it. And then I don't know to what extent this works in the domestic relations world, but we know what there aren't that many jury verdicts today, but we know what juries are doing in an arm-off case. We know what they're doing in a high-level executive's wrongful discharge case. We know what a sexual harassment case will bring. And if somebody wants $1 million in a case where juries are awarding 150,000, then there's some objective criteria against which to measure and see whether these expectations are realistic or not. And sometimes objective information can be helpful. And then the other aspect is, you know, we have a time-honored process in litigation that does include domestic, where losers say, I'm going to appeal. Well, now let's talk about what are the percentages, how many cases get reversed on appeal. Turns out only about 11% of cases are reversed on appeal. So there's an 89% chance that whatever happens at the trial court is going to be your result. How long will it take to complete the appeal? A year, maybe 2 in the Court of Appeals alone. And then if you try to get it to the Supreme Court, how much longer will that take? And how much more money will the appeal cost? An appeal can be $150,000 as well. So all of these things have an impact on people's judgments. I think at the end of the day, what I'm really hoping to accomplish as a mediator is to provide each side with all the information that's available: costs, risk, collateral consequences, the timeline, judges' proclivities, likely outcomes. And then once people have all that information, I'm a great believer that with good advice from counsel, they will make good judgments about whether to settle and on what terms. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did in different ways, but I was thinking what stood out too is, even though you've referred to businesses in this type of negotiation, the mindset of realizing that this is a business transaction, even when families are involved and there's emotion involved, that it's best to figure out a way to see it as a business transaction, that this is the court, and these decisions are very limited. Nothing can be decided in mediation that's going to completely change the nuances of your daily life and your parenting. But the bigger issues, that's what the court can handle. And that's what mediation, you could do more than the court, but it's still not going to be a remedy to fix everything. Right. So I think getting that business mindset of like, we are a business transaction, I have to think very clearly and without emotion and figure out what the best plan is and try to work with this other person is important. Plus the part where you mentioned, if it's not, even if they come in with a $5,000 versus $1 million offer in round 1, that it doesn't matter until round 5. Our clients often feel like if something doesn't happen right away, then it's not worth it. Like, forget it. I went into mediation. What a waste of time. And we try to also educate them on, well, you can't, just like justice takes a long time, the truth can take a long time to come out, that working out conflict resolution can also take time. And it is important to, like you said, to just listen to the other side, not always to come in and say, I need this. It's a way to educate yourself. And it is way cheaper than going to litigation. And I know you also said that with your cases, something like 85 to 90% or higher settle, and that there's something about the vanishing American trial. Oh no, you said not. I know this. 98 to 99% of cases in general settled. And there's an article on the thought of the vanishing American trial. Is that because of mediation?
Well, when I started practicing many years ago now, we tried about 25% of the cases. Today, it's less than 1%. So why is that? Number one, the courts have given trial judges enormous power to dismiss lawsuits, to just throw them out of court without a trial. Just this week, there was in the news, Dominion voting systems versus Fox News. Both sides were asking the judge to throw the other side's case out of court. And it doesn't look like the judge is going to do that, but we'll have to see. So maybe 60% of all lawsuits get thrown out of court without a trial. In a few years ago, before the recent amendments to the Americans with Disabilities Act, read a court decision that noted 90% of ADA cases, Americans with Disability Act cases, were thrown out without a trial. Amazing. There's that. And number two, when we were trying so many cases, we referred to it as rolling the dice, right? People were going to roll the dice. Well, there's another expression that goes along with rolling the dice. It's called betting the farm, meaning people can be wiped out. A corporation could say, I'm not going to pay a penny, millions for defense, not a penny for tribute. And then they get hit for a couple of $1 million, and suddenly they can't borrow money. suddenly they don't have operating revenues, they can go down the tubes. And so people today hire what are known as risk managers to advise them. And so we live in an era where risk management kind of rules the day. People don't want to bet the farm. They don't want to bet. They don't want to roll the dice. And mediation has become increasingly popular, I think, because of the mindset that a good settlement is better than a good lawsuit, because you can always lose a good lawsuit.
Yeah, and that ties into a big thing that stood out from our prior conversation that I want to talk about now, is that there's a lot with lying. People say, oh, my ex is lying. They're lying in mediation. And we talked about how family court is wildly unpredictable and dangerous. There's a danger in going with what you just said, especially when it comes to lies, and that you want your clients to think of a couple of questions, such as, even if it's a lie, what if the other side's story is plausible? And how difficult will it be for you as the client to prove that their other side is lying? You want to expound on that a little more?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing is my own experience as a trial lawyer. I've had 60, 70 jury trials in my time. I think there were 4 or 5 where I was clearly unconditionally able to establish that somebody was lying, even though there were people lying in probably all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases that I handled as a trial lawyer. And now as a mediator, it's rare that somebody isn't accusing the other side of exaggerating, fabricating, lying. It's really hard to prove that somebody is lying. Moreover, what you believe to be true is often dependent on where you stand and where you stood. I'm reminded as now a grandfather of the story of the blind kids and the elephant. You know, the blind kids are taken to the circus and they're given a private session with the elephant trainer. And how do blind kids learn or see? They see with their hands, they touch. And in this book that I've read to my grandkids, the first little kid walks up to the elephant and gets a leg and feels the elephant's leg and says, oh, I know what an elephant is. It's like a tree trunk. And the other kid gets to the trunk of the elephant and says, no, I'll tell you what an elephant is. An elephant is like a boa constrictor. The third kid feels a tusk, you know, the ivory, and says, boa constrictor, tree trunk. No, I think an elephant is like a spear. And the one who gets the ear thinks it's a big leathery piece of lettuce. And the tail, the kid thinks it's a rope. And somebody who just touches the side of the elephant thinks it's like a wall. So where you stand is maybe your perception. And if 2 people are on different sides of a lawsuit and fighting about, you're lying about this, no, or from my perspective, I'm telling the truth. I think you're the one who's lying or exaggerating. So sometimes getting the story out and understanding, when you go up to the balcony and look down, there are reasonable different expectations. And sometimes it's the words themselves. Was it enhanced interrogation techniques we were using in Iraq, or were we torturing people? You know, it depends on your perspective. So you use the word plausible, and I think that's critically important. Anytime the story is plausible, even if it's false, there is a risk that somebody is gonna believe it. Just look at our political discourse today. How many people believe that the election was stolen? A lot of them.
Yeah.
And it depends on which party you're in. So that's perspective.
That's as close as we've ever come to dabbling in politics, and we're not going to go any further.
Very good.
No, that's
I
fine.
thought it was risky to open that door.
No, it's fine.
No,
That's
No,
fine.
I mean, we're certainly all experienced it, and the way you put it is.
Yeah, excellent example.
Yep.
Okay, so just again, like as we wind up, can you just clarify the role of the mediator for people who are still terrified of going to mediation? You can't force a settlement, right?
You cannot force a settlement. We have been trained to be neutral. We have been trained to keep our biases and our own opinions at bay. I like to think of myself as like a juror. I keep an open mind. I ask the parties to submit summaries, written summaries with key documents and transcript attached before every mediation so that I understand what separates them and what the key documents are on which they're relying. And that way I understand what's missing, what people don't know, and I encourage the exchange of these summaries so that each side can see how the other side is presenting the dispute in the light most favorable to themselves. So my goal is to get them all of the information that's available, to encourage them to make good judgments as unclouded by the emotional, the clear and understandable emotion that they bring to it, so that they can make reasonable business judgments about whether to settle and on what terms, to have a better understanding of the other side's perspective. I don't ask you to agree with it, but here's where they're coming from. Is that helpful? I do my best to help them see their underlying needs and interests and what the underlying needs and interests of the other side are, so that they can make more constructive proposals to each other to settle the case, appealing to those underlying needs and interests. And of course, to remind them that this is 100% their decision. And to underscore that, to illustrate that, I quote a friend of mine from a mediator from California named Lee J. Berman, who likes to say, and I say this to them, to the parties. My friend Lee J. Berman likes to tell people, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is I have mediated over 5,000 cases in my career. The bad news is I have never settled one. And, you know, the jaws drop. What? Why did he hire you? He says, because I don't settle them, you do. And if you don't want to settle, it's your case, it's your money, it's your choice, it's your judgment, it's your risk. And if that's how you want to proceed, it's your right. And I'm not going to judge you. Nobody's going to judge you. You're going to roll the dice, and you know, that's what the judge is going to be there for. The judge is there to hear the evidence, and the judge will make a decision, and somebody will win and somebody will lose. Not in mediation. In mediation, everybody's needs and interests can be met if we get them out on the table, we understand them, we examine them, we look at the risks, and then we can make a good judgment that the settlement may be better than rolling the dice. We get it resolved today, if there's money to be changing hands, the money can change hands within days or weeks, rarely longer than 30 days, and closure. And we can get on with our lives. Look forward to the next chapter. Get out from under this thing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shel. How can people find out information, like some of what you published? Or is there anything available to the public that people can look at? I know we found you because we read an excellent article that you had written.
So a couple things. First, if you plug the word mediation into any internet search engine, you're going to get 155 million results. So there's a ton of information on the net. Number two, I have actually retired. At the end of 2022, I took my last case. I still have a couple in the pipeline, but otherwise I'm done. But I'm leaving my website up because I have published dozens of papers to help educate lawyers and clients to get the most out of the process. And if I can give you my website, I'm happy to do that.
Please.
www.starkmediator.com. www.starkmediator.com. And just go to the links, articles and links page, and it's all right there. It's all free. I'm happy to do it. I am blessed that lots of lawyers who I know have written and called and asked me if they can post some of my stuff on their website. So long as you spell my name right, you're welcome to use it. And anybody who's in a dispute and who's looking for some good tips and advice, I have long titles for my articles so that people know this is what they're looking for, and they can find it. And I'm happy to share it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for asking, and I appreciated your questions, and I hope your viewers find it useful. You guys are doing
definitely
important work. It's important work, and the more we can reduce the fire out there, the better.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care, Shel.